Maya Thompson was not just any traveler. She was a woman who commanded respect wherever she went. Her confidence, poise, and sharp sense of style made sure of that. On this particular day, Maya had boarded a flight from New York to Los Angeles, seated comfortably in first class. It wasn't just her destination that mattered. It was the journey too. For years, she'd worked hard to afford the luxuries life could offer, and today, she was enjoying one of them, a peaceful ride in first class. As she settled into her plush leather seat near the window, Maya couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. She pulled out her laptop, ready to review some work documents during the flight. But before she could even open her bag, the atmosphere shifted. A man approached her row, dragging his carry-on bag loudly behind him. His name was Greg, though Maya didn't know that yet. What she did notice, however, was his scowl as he glanced at her. He hesitated for a moment, then plopped down in the seat beside her with an exaggerated sigh. Greg looked around as if searching for someone to complain to. "Excuse me," he said, addressing no one in particular, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure I'm in the right spot? This doesn't seem like, well, my kind of area." The implication hung heavy in the air. Maya stiffened slightly but chose to ignore him, focusing instead on adjusting her seatbelt. But Greg wasn't done. Leaning toward the aisle, he muttered under his breath about how people these days somehow always ended up where they didn't belong. Though he didn't say anything explicitly offensive, at least not yet, the tone of his voice left little room for interpretation. A few heads turned, curious about what might unfold, while others pretended not to notice. A flight attendant walked by, smiling politely as she handed out warm towels. When Greg flagged her down, Maya braced herself. "Hi there," he began, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I just wanted to double-check. This is first class, right? Because honestly, I'm surprised." He gestured vaguely toward Maya without looking directly at her. The flight attendant blinked, clearly caught off guard, and assured him everything was correct before moving on quickly. For a brief moment, Maya considered saying something. Should she confront him, ignore him, or maybe laugh it off? But she decided against all three options, for now. Instead, she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here, to get to Los Angeles safely and efficiently. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to be far from ordinary. Little did she know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would change not only her life, but also the lives of countless others. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya stared out the window, watching the city shrink beneath them. She had no idea what awaited her, but one thing was certain. She wasn't about to let anyone diminish her worth. Not today. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Greg's behavior grew more brazen. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sighing loudly every few minutes as if to make sure everyone around him noticed how displeased he was. At first, Maya tried to focus on her work, typing away at her laptop and pretending not to hear him. But it became impossible to ignore when Greg leaned over to another passenger across the aisle. "Can you believe this?" he whispered, though loud enough for Maya to hear. "They stick anyone in first class these days. It's supposed to be exclusive, right? Not? Well, you know." He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. The other passenger gave an awkward smile and nodded vaguely before turning back to their book, clearly wanting no part of the conversation. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had dealt with people like Greg before, entitled individuals who thought they were better than everyone else simply because of their skin color or background. Normally, she would brush it off and move on, but something about this situation felt different. Maybe it was the altitude, or maybe it was the fact that she had paid good money for this seat, just like everyone else on the plane. Whatever it was, she wasn't going to let him ruin her trip without a fight. Greg wasn't done complaining. He flagged down a flight attendant again, this time demanding a glass of champagne to calm my nerves. When the attendant returned with his drink, he took the opportunity to voice his grievances more openly. "I don't mean to cause trouble," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But I really think there's been some kind of mistake here. This isn't exactly what I signed up for." The flight attendant glanced nervously at Maya, unsure of how to respond. "Sir, your ticket is correct," she said gently. "You're seated in first class, just as you booked." "Well, yes," Greg replied, rolling his eyes dramatically. "But look around. Does this seem normal to you? I mean, come on." He gestured toward Maya again, still refusing to acknowledge her directly. By now, several passengers nearby were exchanging glances, some shaking their heads in disapproval while others looked uncomfortable. One older woman sitting 2 rows ahead turned slightly to give Greg a stern glare, but he didn't notice or didn't care. Finally, Maya decided she'd had enough. Closing her laptop with a soft click, she turned to face Greg, her expression calm but firm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Is there something you'd like to say to me directly?" Greg blinked, caught off guard by her directness. For a moment, he seemed flustered, but then he recovered, forcing a patronizing smile. "Oh, nothing personal," he said dismissively. "I'm just surprised, that's all. First class used to be, well, different." "Different how?" Maya pressed, raising an eyebrow. "Because if you're implying that I don't belong here, I can assure you I do. Just like you." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Greg opened his mouth to retort, but hesitated, realizing he was losing control of the situation. Instead, he sank back into his seat, muttering under his breath about people making things complicated. Though the immediate confrontation ended, the tension remained palpable. Other passengers began whispering among themselves, some expressing sympathy for Maya, while others marveled at her composure. Meanwhile, Greg stewed in silence, his earlier bravado replaced by simmering resentment. Little did either of them know, this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would soon capture the attention of millions around the world. The tension between Maya and Greg continued to simmer, but it wasn't long before things escalated further. As the flight cruised at 35,000 feet, Greg grew increasingly agitated. He shifted in his seat, crossing and uncrossing his legs, clearly unable to settle down. His frustration seemed to boil over when he reached for the shared armrest between him and Maya. Maya had been quietly reading a book, trying her best to ignore Greg's earlier comments, but when she felt Greg's elbow push against her arm, she looked up sharply. "Excuse me," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the hum of the plane's engines. "That's my space." Greg froze for a moment, then smirked as if amused by her response. "Oh, come on," he replied dismissively. "It's just an armrest. Do we really need to make this a big deal?" "It's not about the armrest," Maya shot back, her tone unwavering. "It's about respect. You've made it clear since we boarded that you don't think I belong here, but I do. So maybe try acting like an adult instead of creating unnecessary drama." A few passengers nearby exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement with Maya while others watched nervously, unsure of what might happen next. Greg, however, wasn't ready to back down. Instead of apologizing or moving his arm, he leaned closer, his body language confrontational. "You know what?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "I paid for this seat too, so I deserve just as much comfort as anyone else." "And so do I," Maya countered, her voice steady despite the growing unease around them. "But your behavior has been anything but respectful. If you're uncomfortable sitting next to me, maybe you should have thought about that before booking your ticket." At this point, the situation had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the first-class cabin. Some passengers whispered their support for Maya under their breath, while others simply stared, captivated by the unfolding drama. The flight attendants, who had been avoiding direct involvement, finally stepped forward, though hesitantly. "Is everything okay here?" one of them asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Maya turned to face her, her expression calm but resolute. "Not really," she said. This passenger has been making rude remarks since we boarded, and now he's physically encroaching on my space. I'd appreciate it if someone addressed this properly." The flight attendant glanced at Greg, who immediately feigned innocence. "I haven't done anything wrong," he insisted. "She's the one causing problems." Realizing that no one was stepping up to handle the situation fairly, Maya decided to take matters into her own hands. Pulling out her phone, she opened the camera app and began recording. "Since no one seems willing to intervene," she announced, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I'll document this myself." She pointed the camera at Greg, capturing his defensive posture and irritated expression. Then she turned it toward the flight attendants, whose hesitation was evident. "You can see how they're refusing to address this," Maya narrated calmly as she recorded. "This man has been disrespectful from the start, and now he's escalating things further. I'm simply defending my right to sit here without being harassed." Greg's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Are you serious right now?" he snapped. "This is ridiculous. Who even does this?" "Someone who refuses to stay silent when they're treated unfairly," Maya replied, her voice steady and strong. By now, several passengers were filming the incident on their own phones, realizing the gravity of what was happening. Within minutes, Maya uploaded the video to social media, adding a caption that explained the situation in detail. The post quickly gained traction, sparking outrage among viewers even before the plane landed. As the flight continued, Greg retreated into sullen silence, glaring out the window while Maya sat tall, her composure unshaken. What neither of them realized, however, was that this moment would set off a chain reaction far beyond the confines of the aircraft, a movement fueled by courage, resilience, and the power of speaking truth to injustice. By the time the plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, Maya's video had already gone viral. Millions of people around the world had seen her calm yet powerful response to Greg's behavior, and the hashtag #JusticeForMaya was trending on every major social media platform. News outlets picked up the story within hours, airing clips of the video alongside interviews with experts discussing racism and discrimination in air travel. The sheer speed at which the incident spread online caught everyone by surprise, even Maya herself. As passengers disembarked, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Greg stormed off the plane first, his face red with anger and embarrassment. He muttered something under his breath about people blowing things out of proportion, but no one paid him any attention. Other travelers avoided eye contact, some shaking their heads in disapproval as they passed him by. Meanwhile, Maya gathered her belongings and prepared to exit, aware that all eyes were now on her. At the gate, a small crowd had gathered, reporters, curious onlookers, and even a few airport staff members who recognized her from the video. A young journalist approached cautiously, holding a microphone. "Miss Thompson," she asked hesitantly, "would you mind sharing your thoughts on what happened?" Maya paused for a moment, considering how much she wanted to say. She knew this was her chance to speak directly to the public, to explain not just her experience but also the larger issue at hand. Taking a deep breath, she nodded and stepped forward. "Of course," she said, her voice steady and clear. "What happened today wasn't just about me or that man. It's about a system that allows discrimination to go unchecked. I paid for my seat, just like anyone else, and yet I was treated as if I didn't belong there simply because of the color of my skin." Her words resonated deeply with those listening. Passengers who had witnessed the incident nodded in agreement, while others filmed her impromptu speech on their phones. The flight attendants stood by and did nothing. Maya continued. "They let this man harass me without stepping in to protect me. That's unacceptable. Airlines need to do better, not just for me, but for everyone who faces similar treatment." The journalist thanked her, and soon other reporters joined in, asking questions about what action she planned to take next. Maya admitted she hadn't decided yet, but emphasized that staying silent was never an option. "I've worked too hard to let moments like this slide," she said. "If speaking up can help create change, then I'll keep doing it. Meanwhile, online reactions were pouring in from every corner of the globe. Thousands of people shared their own stories of facing discrimination while traveling, tagging Maya's post and expressing gratitude for her courage. Celebrities and activists amplified her message, calling for accountability from the airline. Others criticized Greg's behavior, labeling him as a symbol of privilege and entitlement. Memes mocking his actions began circulating, adding a layer of humor to the outrage. Back at the airline's headquarters, executives scrambled to respond to the growing backlash. Their initial statement, a generic apology posted on Twitter, had only fueled more criticism. Customers began canceling flights en masse, and sponsors threatened to pull partnerships unless the company took concrete steps to address the issue. Internally, employees started speaking out anonymously, revealing patterns of discriminatory practices toward minority travelers. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much bigger problem. For Maya, standing at the center of the storm felt surreal. She had boarded the flight expecting nothing more than a routine trip, but now she found herself thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of resilience and justice. As she walked through the bustling terminal, surrounded by reporters and supporters alike, she couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life could change. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when so many others were counting on her to fight for something greater than herself. The days following the viral video were a whirlwind for Maya. What had started as a personal confrontation on a flight quickly transformed into a national conversation about racism, accountability, and corporate responsibility. The airline, now under intense scrutiny, tried to salvage its reputation but struggled to keep up with the growing demands for transparency and reform. Customers continued canceling flights, sponsors distanced themselves publicly, and employees spoke out more boldly about systemic issues within the company. Maya knew she couldn't let the momentum die down. She decided it was time to take legal action, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race or background. With the help of civil rights attorneys, she filed a formal complaint against the airline, accusing them of negligence and discrimination. Her lawsuit sought not only financial compensation, but also significant policy changes to ensure that incidents like hers would never happen again. As news of the lawsuit broke, public support for Maya surged even higher. People admired her courage and determination, seeing her as someone willing to stand up not just for herself, but for justice on a larger scale. Donations poured in to fund her legal battle, and advocacy groups reached out offering resources and expertise. Even strangers sent messages of encouragement, thanking her for shining a light on an issue many had faced, but few had dared to challenge so openly. Meanwhile, the airline found itself in damage control mode. Executives held emergency meetings, scrambling to craft a response that would appease both the public and their investors. They issued another statement, this time more detailed, promising zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior and pledging to review their training programs for staff. But these promises rang hollow to many, especially when internal memos leaked online showing executives downplaying the incident as unfortunate but isolated. Frustrated by the lack of meaningful action, Maya called a press conference to address the situation directly. Standing confidently before a room full of reporters, she laid out her demands clearly: mandatory diversity training for all employees, independent oversight of customer complaints, and greater representation of minorities in leadership roles within the airline. "This isn't just about me getting an apology," she said firmly. "It's about creating real change. Change that protects future travelers from experiencing what I went through." Her words resonated deeply, putting additional pressure on the airline to act. Lawmakers took notice too, with several proposing legislation aimed at holding companies accountable for discriminatory practices. Congressional hearings were scheduled, where Maya was invited to testify about her experience. Her testimony moved lawmakers and viewers alike, highlighting how systemic racism could manifest in everyday situations, even something as simple as boarding a plane. Behind the scenes, Maya worked tirelessly alongside her legal team to build a strong case. They gathered evidence, including witness statements from passengers on the flight and internal documents from the airline. Social media played a crucial role as well, with supporters using hashtags like #AccountabilityInAction to keep the story alive and hold the airline's feet to the fire. Despite the stress of the situation, Maya remained focused and resolute. She understood that fighting such a powerful institution wouldn't be easy, but she also knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just about one bad experience. It was about challenging a culture of complacency and ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. By the time the trial date was set, the entire nation seemed to be watching. Supporters organized rallies outside courthouses, holding signs that read, "Stand with Maya," and "Justice for all travelers." Celebrities tweeted endorsements of her cause, while late-night talk show hosts used their platforms to discuss the broader implications of the case. The airline, once seen as untouchable, now appeared vulnerable, a testament to the power of collective outrage and determination. For Maya, this chapter of her life was far from over. But as she prepared for the courtroom battles ahead, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a better, fairer world, one where respect and dignity weren't privileges reserved for a select few, but rights guaranteed to everyone. And she wasn't going to stop until she saw that vision become reality. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial, a testament to how deeply Maya's case had resonated with people across the country. Reporters jostled for seats in the gallery, while supporters filled every available space, holding signs that read "Justice for Maya" and "End Discrimination Now." Even those who couldn't attend followed the proceedings live online, refreshing their screens for updates. The stakes were high, not just for Maya, but for the airline, which faced potential financial penalties and irreversible damage to its reputation. As the trial began, Maya sat calmly beside her legal team, exuding quiet confidence despite the weight of the moment. Her attorneys presented a compelling case, laying out evidence that painted a clear picture of negligence and systemic bias within the airline. They highlighted Greg's discriminatory remarks, the flight attendant's failure to intervene, and internal documents showing years of ignored complaints from minority passengers. Witness testimonies from fellow travelers on the flight added emotional impact, with one woman tearfully recounting how she felt powerless watching Maya being mistreated. The airline's defense team argued that the incident was an isolated event, not reflective of their policies or practices. They claimed they had diversity initiatives in place and insisted that Maya's experience was unfortunate, but not indicative of widespread issues. However, under cross-examination, cracks began to show. When pressed about why no action had been taken against Greg during the flight, a senior executive admitted that staff often avoided confrontations with difficult customers, even if it meant ignoring discriminatory behavior. This admission drew audible gasps from the audience and became a turning point in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, Maya remained composed, speaking only when called to testify. When her turn came, she addressed the court with poise and clarity, recounting the events of the flight and explaining how they made her feel devalued and disrespected. This wasn't just about one man's prejudice, she said, her voice steady yet impassioned. It was about an entire system that allowed his behavior to go unchecked. I'm here today because I want accountability, not just for me, but for everyone who deserves to travel without fear of discrimination. Her words struck a chord with the judge and jury, many of whom nodded in agreement. By the time closing arguments concluded, it was clear that public opinion, and perhaps the law, was firmly on Maya's side. Weeks later, the verdict arrived. The airline was found liable for failing to protect Maya and ordered to pay substantial damages. But more importantly, the court mandated sweeping reforms, including mandatory diversity training for all employees, stricter protocols for handling discrimination complaints, and partnerships with advocacy groups to promote inclusivity. These measures were designed not only to punish the airline, but also to prevent similar incidents in the future. In response, the airline issued a public statement acknowledging their shortcomings and pledging to implement the court-ordered changes. While some critics dismissed these promises as too little, too late, others saw them as a step in the right direction. Internally, however, the fallout continued. Several high-profile executives resigned amid mounting pressure, and employees began pushing for greater transparency and accountability at every level. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. She knew the settlement wouldn't erase the pain of what she'd endured, but it validated her decision to speak up. More importantly, it gave her a platform to create lasting change. Using part of the compensation, she founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating racism and discrimination in public spaces. Named Wings of Dignity, the group provided resources for victims of bias, advocated for policy reforms, and partnered with businesses to foster inclusive environments. Maya's work quickly gained traction, earning praise from activists and industry leaders alike. She traveled the country giving speeches, sharing her story, and inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Along the way, she connected with countless individuals who had faced similar challenges, finding strength in their shared experiences. What started as a single act of resistance on a plane had grown into a movement, one that reminded the world of the power of courage, resilience, and collective action. Though the battle was far from over, Maya felt hopeful. For the first time in a long time, she believed real change was possible, and she was determined to be part of making it happen. Months after the trial, Maya's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. The once private marketing executive was now a household name, recognized not just for her resilience, but also for her unwavering commitment to justice. Her nonprofit organization, Wings of Dignity, had grown rapidly, attracting volunteers, donors, and partnerships from across the globe. What started as a small initiative born out of frustration had become a beacon of hope for countless individuals who felt marginalized or silenced. Maya spent her days traveling to different cities, speaking at conferences, schools, and community centers. She shared her story openly, emphasizing that while her experience on the flight was painful, it taught her the importance of standing up, even when it felt daunting. Courage isn't about being fearless, she often said during her speeches. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. Her words resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring many to confront their own fears and advocate for change in their communities. One of the most impactful aspects of Wings of Dignity was its mentorship program, which focused on empowering young women of color entering professional fields. Maya understood firsthand how challenging it could be to navigate spaces where you didn't always feel welcome, so she made it her mission to provide guidance and support to the next generation. Through workshops, networking events, and one-on-one mentoring sessions, she helped young women build confidence, develop leadership skills, and learn how to navigate bias in the workplace. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Major media outlets featured Maya as a changemaker, highlighting her work and the ripple effect it was creating. Corporations began reaching out, eager to collaborate with her organization to improve their diversity and inclusion practices. Some even invited her to consult directly, helping them overhaul outdated policies and foster more equitable environments. While Maya remained cautious, knowing that some companies might only want to appear progressive, she seized these opportunities to push for genuine, systemic change. At the same time, the airline continued its attempts to rebuild trust with the public. True to the court's mandate, they implemented new training programs and hired external auditors to review customer complaints. Employees reported feeling more empowered to speak up against discriminatory behavior, though progress was slow and uneven. Maya kept a close eye on their efforts, occasionally calling them out publicly when she felt they weren't doing enough. Change doesn't happen overnight, she reminded her followers, but we have to stay vigilant and hold people accountable every step of the way. Despite her growing influence, Maya remained grounded. She often reflected on the journey that brought her here, the moments of doubt, the backlash she faced, and the overwhelming support she received. Though scars from the incident lingered, She found solace in knowing she turned a deeply personal struggle into something meaningful. Her family and friends marveled at her transformation, proud of how she'd channeled pain into purpose. By the end of the year, Maya's impact extended beyond air travel. Lawmakers cited her case when drafting new anti-discrimination laws, ensuring protections for travelers regardless of race, gender, or background. Activists around the world credited her with reigniting conversations about systemic racism and privilege, proving that one person's courage could spark global movements. As she prepared for another round of speaking engagements, Maya paused to reflect on how far she'd come. The road ahead was still long, filled with challenges and battles yet to fight. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of gratitude. For the strangers who stood by her, for the lessons learned, and for the chance to make the world a little fairer, one step at a time. Months turned into years, and Maya's legacy continued to grow. The changes she fought for weren't just limited to the airline industry. They sparked a broader cultural shift in how people thought about respect, inclusion, and accountability in public spaces. Airports across the country began displaying posters promoting anti-discrimination policies, while airlines introduced anonymous reporting systems for passengers who experienced bias. Even other industries took note, implementing similar measures to ensure their customers felt safe and valued. For Maya, life had settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. She no longer traveled as frequently for work, but made it a point to fly occasionally, not out of necessity, but to remind herself of where her journey began. On one such trip, she boarded a flight from Los Angeles to New York, this time greeted warmly by attentive staff who recognized her name on the passenger manifest. "Miss Thompson," a flight attendant said with a genuine smile, "we're honored to have you on board today." The moment struck Maya deeply. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about how much things had changed since that fateful day years ago. As she settled into her seat, she noticed subtle differences, diverse faces among the crew, inclusive announcements over the intercom, and an overall atmosphere of kindness and professionalism. These small shifts were testaments to the hard-fought battles she and countless others had waged. During the flight, a young woman seated beside her struck up a conversation. "Are you the Maya Thompson?" the girl asked shyly, her eyes wide with admiration. When Maya nodded, the woman beamed. "I can't tell you how much your story inspired me. I started my own nonprofit last year because of what you did. You showed me that standing up for yourself can lead to bigger change." Maya smiled, humbled by the impact her actions had on strangers. They spoke for the remainder of the flight, exchanging stories and ideas about creating equitable spaces. By the time they landed, Maya felt reinvigorated, reminded once again of why she'd chosen this path. Back home, Wings of Dignity thrived under Maya's leadership. The organization had expanded globally, partnering with advocacy groups in Europe, Africa, and Asia to tackle discrimination in various forms. Their annual summit brought together activists, policymakers, and corporate leaders to discuss progress and challenges, fostering collaboration across industries. Maya often joked that she never imagined her life would revolve around keynote speeches and panel discussions, but deep down, she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. Still, Maya understood that the fight was far from over. While significant strides had been made, pockets of resistance remained. Some companies resisted meaningful reform, paying lip service to diversity without taking real action. Others tried to discredit activists like Maya, accusing them of being divisive or overly critical. But Maya refused to let cynicism dampen her resolve. "Progress isn't linear," she told her team during a strategy meeting. "We celebrate the wins, learn from the losses, and keep moving forward." In quieter moments, Maya allowed herself to reflect on the personal cost of her journey. There were sleepless nights spent worrying about backlash, strained relationships with loved ones who struggled to understand her relentless drive, and days when self-doubt crept in. Yet through it all, she held on to the belief that her voice mattered, and that using it could make the world better for someone else. As she stood on stage at the latest Wings of Dignity Gala, Surrounded by supporters and allies, Maya felt a profound sense of gratitude. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces of all ages, races, and backgrounds, each person united by a shared vision of equality and justice. "This isn't my victory," she said during her closing remarks. "It's ours. Together, we've proven that courage and compassion can move mountains, and there are still so many more mountains to climb." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing not just in the grand ballroom, but in Maya's heart. For every challenge she faced, there were 10 victories waiting to inspire her. For every voice silenced, there were hundreds ready to rise. And for every injustice left unaddressed, there was a community determined to right it. Maya stepped off the stage that night knowing her work would never truly be done, but also knowing she wouldn't have it any other way. Her journey had taught her that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. All it took was one brave step, and sometimes one unforgettable flight, to set the wheels of justice in motion.